guys, Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth. We're here with Peter Schiff. Sir, thank you very much for taking some time to speak with us here today. In your book, The Real Crash, you successfully predicted what was about to happen in 2008, and when it did, everybody said, oh my God, he was right. Now, in your speech, you mentioned that wasn't even the crash that you were necessarily referring to. So what can people expect from the actual real crash when it comes?
Well, the original book was Crash Proof, right? How to profit from the coming economic collapse. That's the one that came out in 2007. The one that came out more recently, and I've revised it, is The Real Crash. And the real crash is the crash that I actually predicted in the 2007 book, but that hasn't happened yet. But a lot of people were confused because the 2008 financial crisis happened and they thought that was the crash. It wasn't. I mean, I did forecast the events of 2008. That was part of the book, right? I spent a lot of the book was dedicated to the housing bubble, how the government inflated it, how it was, integral to the economy, what was going to happen when it burst, that we would have the Great Recession. I said we'd have the greatest recession since the Great Depression, 10% unemployment, we'd have trillion-dollar deficits. I said banks would fail, Fannie and Freddie would go bankrupt. That is all in there. But that was not the crash I was referring to. The crash I was referring to was the one that still hasn't happened yet. What I wrote back then is, in response to that Great Recession and the collapse of the housing market, the Federal Reserve would once again double down on the policies that caused the problem. They would try to reflate the bubbles. They would print a bunch of money, right? Slash interest rates, and that was going to bring about a collapse of the dollar and the bond market. That crash hasn't happened yet. I still believe it's coming, and that's why I wrote that book, to let everybody know, hey, the problem isn't solved. The government made it worse in the precise manner that I predicted it would. And so now the collapse, and I always said that it wasn't that disease that was going to kill us. I said, here's what's wrong with the economy. We got this housing bubble. That's the disease. We got too much debt. But what I said was going to kill us wasn't the disease, but the government's cure. And unfortunately, I think I'm going to be proven correct on this one.
In Canada, we have something very similar to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. It's the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, where they guarantee all of Canada's mortgages, and for anything less than a 20% down payment. And our central bank also has artificially low rates right now, and it seems that there is a housing bubble in Canada. Do you think that we're in a similar situation as the U.S. was?
I don't know that it's similar in that it's as extreme, and that the economy in Canada is as dependent as the U.S. economy was to the housing market. But I would certainly agree that residential property is overpriced, and it's going to come down in real terms. But whether it will have the destructive effect that it had in the United States, it's a different story. But I would not recommend investing in residential property in Canada. There are places to invest in Canada. I think the resource sector is an excellent place to invest. And I think the Canadian economy will benefit from the resurgence in resources. But I don't think it's going to mean that you should buy real estate. But I'm not looking for a U.S.-style implosion. We can have a reduction in price, a 20–30% reduction in price. Doesn't mean it's the end of the world. But yeah, some guaranteed mortgages will fail, and so the taxpayers will have to pick up those losses. But I think that the Canadian economy will at least benefit by the exports in resources and expanded trade with China. And so that could mitigate the damage.
Well, it seems like we're so closely aligned with America that when this inevitable crash does happen, as you suggested, we will be affected.
No question about it. I mean, that's, we have Europe, Pacific, Canada, and we advise Canadians to diversify abroad. Not to the United States, but looking to Asia and other parts of the world that are less closely connected to America. But Canadians are also in a good position in their proximity to the United States, because when America collapses and the dollar collapses, the Canadians will be in prime position to buy some real estate in the United States, vacation house. It gets cold up there. We have a lot of property in Florida and California that they might want to buy, or Arizona, very inexpensively. And they also might benefit from a lot of American workers coming up to Canada because they can't find work in the United States, and so Canada will get the benefit of that influx.
Any final thoughts on how what people should be Canadians, Americans be thinking about how to protect themselves before this happens? Is gold the answer?
Yeah, well, I mean, gold's the answer to a lot of questions, but people should own gold, but not only gold. But we recommend people diversify, find the countries that have the most to gain from the collapse of the dollar. Right? There are going to be winners and losers. Americans are going to be the big losers, no question about that. But there are going to be winners. So you want to bet on the winners. You want to own assets in the countries that have a lot to gain from the dollar's demise. Because right now there are a lot of countries that are suffering because they have to prop up the dollar. They have to support the dollar. Their own people are suffering so that Americans can keep consuming things that they can't afford. Capital is being diverted from more productive uses abroad to prop up the U.S. government, to prop up the U.S. dollar. And so I think right now this is a giant burden on a lot of people that will be lifted when they no longer have to support America's spending habit and our borrowing habit. So understand the way the world is going to change when the dollar is no longer the center of the financial universe, right? No longer the key currency. And there's a lot of money to be made by people who understand, what's going to happen and how it's going to affect various countries.
Right.
Yeah. And we're basing our investment philosophy on that. So if you're Canadian, you're working with Europe Pacific Canada, or if you have an account with my offshore bank, Europe Pacific Bank, that's EuroPacBank.com is the website, or EuroPac Canada. We have these strategies for people to protect their wealth and to position themselves not for the way the world is today, but for the way the world is going to be tomorrow.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for speaking.
Bye.